Welcome into the Tuesday edition of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Barry Allen joins me. Barry, the SEC had one game last night. It was a classic, but not a good outcome. Vanderbilt loses 1-0 to North Carolina State. I don't think that was a score we saw coming, especially with the 0 attached to Vanderbilt. But that's what it was. It was a game I think that'll be talked about for years. Jack Leiter was tremendous for Vanderbilt, but Sam Highfill for NC State was just a little more effective. Give me your thoughts on that one, if you would, please.
Yeah, I think the story obviously was the pitching. Both sides. Leiter was really good, 15 strikeout. Made one mistake, and I don't even know if it was a mistake. I think it was just guy hit a pitch and hit a home run, and I don't know that it was a bad pitch. I think it was probably a good piece of hitting. Something we did not see in the other dugout. Vanderbilt just had no clue. I mean, no clue at all in 9 innings last night what was going on with Highfill and I forget the kid's name, the reliever.
Evan Justice.
Evan Justice. It slipped my mind. So many guys out there. It's hard sometimes to remember everybody. But they had no clue. They had no answers. I think Tim Corbin said in his post-game press conference, he said, we didn't get the barrel on the ball once. And he said, we got beat 1-0 in a, heck of a pitch game. I'll clean that up a little bit. But they didn't. They had 2 hits. They both came with 2 outs, one in the first inning, one in the 5th inning. They got 1 runner past first base, and he was stranded at third in, I believe, the 7th inning. To kind of show you how frustrating it was for Vanderbilt last night, they pinch hit for their cleanup hitter in the 9th inning after Keegan had hit into a double play. I think Carter Young walked. Keegan hits into a double play. Might have been one of their best at-bats of the night. He hit a hard grounder to second, but the double play. And it kills the whole inning, and then they pinch hit for the cleanup guy to end the game. That kind of shows you the frustrations that Vanderbilt had last night on offense. And credit Highfill and Justice and for the way they pitched, and credit Terrell Tatum's 1 home run, and North Carolina made it stick. And here they are, a win away from playing for the national championship. And Vanderbilt's path is clearly much more difficult now than it was yesterday.
Let's talk about Sam Highfill for State, who was magnificent. He's listed as a freshman, and this is a pet peeve of mine. He's a sophomore, really, but the whole COVID thing is screwed it up. He did pitch for State last year. I thought he was really good, Barry. I thought Vanderbilt was very passive on first pitches. He kept throwing strikes, so it was almost an automatic 0-1. It's a lot harder to hit at that point when you're facing a guy who can throw a lot of stuff from a lot of angles, and I just thought that's what did Vanderbilt in.
Yeah, you start 0-1, and then you did strike out a lot of guys, but it seemed like that every strikeout was a call third strike. I mean, I know Bradfield took one down the pipe in the 8th inning to end the inning, and I think Colwick did the same thing, the pinch hitter to end the game. And there were several others throughout the course of the game. Maybe they didn't think they were strikes, but I mean, at some point in time, you got to adjust and know what the umpire's calling. But yeah, I think his location and his change of speeds and his pitch selection was real key last night, and he just completely confused Vanderbilt. They looked like a very, very confused offensive team in that game last night. And I know they came in leading the SEC in hitting, but not really one of the juggernaut offenses that you think you get with Vanderbilt, in the last few years. Not a scary type offense that's going to come up, crank out a bunch of home runs and score a ton of runs on you anyway. But last night, I mean, those 2 guys really did a good job. Highfill especially. He did the same thing at Arkansas. He had 15 in a row. He retired at one point at Arkansas, and just has dominated 2 really good SEC teams in his last 2 starts in the NCAA tournament. And his kids pitch really well. He's got some experience, and it just looked really good last night. Looked really good last week against Arkansas.
On the other side, you had Jack Leiter, who was just awesome last night. 15 strikeouts, 124 pitches. The breaking ball was really working for him early in the game. When that wasn't working as much, he just went right back to the fastball. He got strikeouts on 96 on the last 2 outs of the 7th. I think if anybody had any doubt about Jack Leiter as a draft prospect, I think just watching that game alone could have answered any of those questions.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt there. Kid was dominant. I mean, that was the definition of a tough luck losing pitcher last night. I mean, he pitched his rear end off and 15 strikeouts, just dominated their lineup. What he started out, 10 of his first 11 batters were first pitch strikes. And you talk about being 0-1, you being in a hole. What he retired the first 12 that he faced, and then the leadoff guy, homers on him in the fifth inning, loses not only the perfect game but the no hitter and the shutout all in one swat there in the fifth inning, and then came back and just dominated. And I think the announcers were a little surprised he came back in the eighth inning. Maybe it was, but he certainly dominated them in the eighth inning, and just pitched an incredible game. And just unfortunately for him, he got 0 run support and 2 singles, and it made it really tough. But I mean, he could have folded there one end when they had the bases loaded and no outs in the seventh, if I'm not mistaken. They got the little infield single to load them up, and I think that's probably might have been the best inning he's pitched all year long. He got out of that, kept his team in the game, and his base hit there makes 3-0. It might as well have been 300-0 because they weren't going to score 1 run, let alone 3 or 4. Might have, they'd have gotten a hit in that inning. North Carolina State stakes it 3-0. That might have been like 300-0 because there'd been they were no chance at scoring 3 runs, and obviously didn't score 1. But I thought that was a big moment for him and kept his team in the game. And just unfortunately, Vanderbilt just couldn't help him.
I think we could talk about Vanderbilt's path forward tomorrow, but basically, I think I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. It's going to have to probably be one of 2 freshmen. And when I say freshmen, I mean first year on campus, Patrick Riley and Christian Little. And they're both really talented, but they've also been really uneven. And that's not a great spot to be in, given how well the teams in that side of the bracket hit.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough game for Vanderbilt tomorrow, for sure. The Stanford team can really hit. They showed that yesterday with the bludgeoning they put on Arizona and knocked them out of the tournament. And what they did at Texas Tech. I mean, this is a good offense, can score runs. Brock Jones is on fire in the NCAA tournament. He's hit 4 home runs in the super regionals and the regionals. And, Vandy struggled this year. That third guy has struggled for them all year long. They really haven't had a guy that they can run him out there and go, here's your deal. If they can get 4 or 5 innings out of one of those guys tomorrow and then turn it back over to Maldonado and Murphy and, piece the game together, then they've got a shot at that. But, counting the national championship series, Vanderbilt's got to win 5 games now in a week. This is Tuesday. So in 8 days, they got to win 5 games in the next 8 days to win the national championship. And other than Leiter and Rocker, I'm not sure they're built for that. Just the way their pitching has been all year long. And that we'll talk more about tomorrow when we preview the game. But they're playing a Stanford team that's hitting 326 in the NCAA tournament, leads the tournament with 21 home runs. So they're gonna face a really good offense. Now Vanderbilt, advantage of that is when they're coming off a 2-hit game, they're going to face the number 3 guy for Stanford. That's ERAs in that 5 and 6 range too. So that may help them in that deal. But just losing that game last night, whoever that was, that makes a tough road for anybody trying to bounce back and win the thing after dropping that second game.
Let's talk Tennessee, Texas today. That doesn't feel like it should be an elimination game, but it is. I think we talked before the podcast amongst ourselves about, who's going to win this game, who's got an advantage. I think this is a fascinating and pretty even matchup, and I think this game today, as we sit here doing this Tuesday morning, could be a classic.
Yeah, I think this could be one of the marquee games of the tournament. Maybe similar to what we saw at Mississippi State, Texas Sunday night. Not maybe as many strikeouts, but and Texas would be all for that. But I think this has the making of being a really good game today in a loser's bracket game. And you get out here, anybody that loses and goes 0-2, goes home is a really good team, or you wouldn't be in Omaha. But the one thing that jumps out for me in this game today is Tennessee's resiliency and the way they bounce back. They're 15-1 this year following a loss. They've only lost back-to-back games once, and that was in an odd doubleheader at home on February the 27th to Indiana State, who actually got into a regional. So I like that from Tennessee. And Texas is as much history as they have in the College World Series, not good of late. They're trying to avoid their second straight 0-2 trip to Omaha, if you can believe that. And they went 0-2 in 18. They also went 0-2 in 2011. So if they lose today, that'll be 3 times in their last 4 trips to Omaha. They went 0-2, and only 4-9 is Texas in their last 13 games in the College World Series. So, a resilient Tennessee team, they've got to do things today they didn't do against Virginia. They only had 6 singles, no home runs. They came in hitting a ton of home runs. They had 16 home runs in the NCAA tournament before coming into the Omaha. I didn't think Dallas was terrible the other day on the mound, but it probably wasn't one of his better outings. And Virginia kind of got to him in the 7th inning. So I think, I think as Tennessee said after the game, they got to go back to what brought them to Omaha and get them back there and throw strikes, move runners. Tennessee was 0 for 8 with runners in scoring position and hit home runs. And that's something that they didn't do Sunday in the loss to Virginia.
Another game, I'm not convinced this one's going to be as good. Mississippi State and Virginia. I think the pitching matchup tends to tilt towards Mississippi State, although Christian McLeod, it's hit or miss with him. But Griff McGarry kind of caught lightning in a bottle for Virginia last game, and that seems to happen a lot in this tournament. But I think State's got a really good shot to move into the winner's bracket. But we also thought that about Vanderbilt yesterday too, Barry.
Yeah, we did. We thought they had the pitching advantage, and minus 1 pitch, they're even Steven in that game last night. But yeah, I think McLeod's got the advantage, for Mississippi State today, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Landon Sims come back if they needed him. But Gary's 0-5 this year in 13 games and 10 starts for Virginia, so that concerns me for them going against the Mississippi State team. Both of these teams are fairly similar offensively in the NCAA tournament. Mississippi State's hitting 284 in the tournament. Virginia only hits 282. Mississippi State scored 53 runs in the tournament. Virginia scored 51 runs in the tournament. I mean, so they're very similar offensive clubs. And I think today we've talked about this before we started our podcast. I think the difference in this game would be the pitching, the starting pitching at least. Virginia's relied on their bullpen a ton in the NCAA tournament. I think Abbott's win the other day was their only game that a starter has won in the tournament. The bullpen has gotten the rest of them. Had a lot of saves. They've really used their guys. Wyatt came in and pitched 3 innings and got a save the other day. He's been real effective. They've had a lot of guys in the bullpen that's been very effective for them in the postseason. So too has Mississippi State. But I think in this game today that the starting pitching is going to be the difference in this game, and I think Christian McLeod's going to come through for Mississippi State and make that happen.
Barry, the LSU job still open today. No surprise. I think it'll be open for a few more days, I would expect. I mean, who knows? But one candidate who's been mentioned, Jay Johnson, Arizona, I think's done a great job there. He's making $530,000. LSU could, put increase that by a multiple of at least 2, if not more like 4. What are your thoughts on where LSU is going with the search? I know we talked about it yesterday, but I'm just curious if you have any new thoughts on this since we spoke about it yesterday.
Not really. It's really kind of hard to put your finger on what they're doing. The longer this goes on, it's obvious that some guy they want is in Omaha. I think that's pretty obvious. And who is that? Is it Jay Johnson at Arizona, who's done a really good job taking his team to Omaha twice in 6 years that he's been there? Actually, 5 times he could go. Nobody could go last year. But 2 out of the 5 years they could go to Omaha, he's been. Is Tim Corbin a viable candidate at Vanderbilt? What about Brian O'Connor at Virginia, who's a Maneri guy? Are they interested in that? I don't think there was any harsh feelings or bitterness in Maneri leaving, and I think he retired. I mean, I don't know that he was asked to retire. I don't know that he was told to retire or forced to retire or whatever. But I don't know that there's any animosity there. And Brian O'Connor was with him at Notre Dame and has done a tremendous job at Virginia and has won a national championship. And if you're LSU and you're saying, I have not seen this, but if you're saying we want somebody that's won a national championship, not a lot of guys out there that can say that. And there are two of them that are still in Omaha, in Tim Corbin and Brian O'Connor. So I'm not sure what they're looking for, what they're doing right now. I think the best thing for, just they're playing that waiting game, and I guess to see who's going to finish up in Omaha, and who gets bounced first, and maybe obviously Arizona's went out first. So if we start seeing some traction today about Jay Johnson, then maybe that's their guy. But I don't really have a handle on what's going on there right now, and why they're and why they haven't gotten anybody. Leads me to believe they're waiting on somebody in Omaha, and they're waiting on that season to end so that they can get that deal done.
Yeah, perception is he wants to make a splash hire. And look, I don't know that you have to have this guy or that guy. There's a lot of good candidates out there, some in Omaha, some not. You might go through 10 guys and might get turned down by 10, but 11 might be pretty good too. I mean, I think if people could put their pride and the whole, we got to get the best guy out of their way, I think sometimes those get in the way of making a good hire. LSU should get somebody good regardless of what happens. I'm just curious where it settles. I thought maybe it was Cliff Godwin, but Johnson's name coming up has been interesting. Arizona has kept some coaches who've been pursued by some other schools recently, so that's something to watch. But the big takeaway in this for me so far is Paul Maneri ought to be getting a lot of thank you notes from coaches and agents, because he's made a lot of people a lot of money, which I can't remember who it was. I think it was somebody on ESPN that made that statement the minute that job came open. And my goodness, I think that's proving to be right.
Yeah, the old trickle down effect. I don't know that Jimmy Sexton is a huge agent in the college baseball world, but I know, as a big agent in football, when one guy moves, I think he's agent for seems like he's the agent of every coach and every coordinator in the country, and he's got the monopoly on college football. And so if this guy leaves Alabama as an assistant, go to somewhere as a head coach, and then Alabama hires this guy, and they, it seems like you say, well, they had 6 moves today that was over $200 million, and that's $20 million or so for Jimmy Sexton. So, yeah, there's some money to be made in helping, maybe I'm sure Bianco got a little bit of a push at Ole Miss, a little bit of a raise, and, some of these other guys that are, being considered, and then say, well, not necessarily, what they're doing, and making some guys some money, in college baseball, but, because of his retirement and guys that LSU's been interested in. But, Arizona's done a nice job. I mean, Greg Byrne, who's the AD at Alabama and was at Mississippi State, was at Arizona. They didn't have much. They had an okay field, but they moved their ballpark to High Corbett Field and renovated the ballpark. And he put a lot of interest and a lot of time and money into baseball there, and went out and hired Jay Johnson as coach, and said he's been to Omaha twice in his 5 years that he could go to Omaha at Arizona, and they led the nation in scoring this year. So they've done some dynamic things in Tucson for college baseball. They've have history. They've won 4 national championships. I guess recently they beat South Carolina in 12, keep South Carolina from winning their 3rd in a row. But they have history there, and so that's a good job. But his salary doesn't quite compare to what the guys are making on this side of the country in the SEC. And I certainly think he would be willing to listen to from what'd you say, 530,000 is what he's making at Arizona to if
Correct,
LSU called and it's 1.8 or 2 point whatever. I certainly think you got to listen to that, because Even if you go 1.5, you're tripling salary. And I know there's a lot of pressure there, but a lot of access to win too. And whoever takes over this team is going to have Trey Morgan and Dylan Cruz in their lineup next year. And that's not going to be a bad thing either.
Well, Barry, when we do this again tomorrow, there's going to be anywhere between 1 or to 3 SEC teams still alive. It's been a fascinating tournament. Can't wait to see what happens today, and we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Sounds good. I just want to throw this out real quick we talked about Vandy last night. We talked about their struggles on offense, and just through the first 3 days of the SEC tournament, SEC teams are hitting a combined 197 in Omaha and have scored 8 runs. 2 of those in the last 27 innings of play. Vandy scored 6 in their opener Saturday night. Tennessee, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt, the last 3 games, have scored 2 total runs with 2 shutouts. Pitching staff has a 2.61 ERA, which is not terrible. 60 strikeouts in 38 innings. But the SEC team's got to find a little more offense in Omaha if they want to stay around past these first round games and get into the finals next week. They're going to have to find some more offense, in the coming days to stay in Omaha and play for the national championship.
I agree totally with that. And offense or no offense, we'll be back on Wednesday to talk about it. Thank you for listening to the Tuesday episode of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 14 Southeastern. Get us on your podcast feed wherever you get those. Rate, review, subscribe, help us out. And be sure and check out our content at southeastern14.com. A little different than what we do on the podcast here at times. But anyway, I'm your host, Chris Lee. He's Barry Allen. Thank you for listening today. We'll see you again tomorrow with the next episode of the 14.